Thanks, Tom. So I'll say a bit about one of the ballot papers, and then I'll start on the other one, but I'm going to hand over to Jerry White to go into some of the details on our behalfs. So as Tom said, this is our best attempt to try and come up with an opportunity for the members of the convention to vote on the themes that you were discussing yesterday. And it's as good as we think we can get it. So I'm going to start with the vote on encouraging greater participation of women in public life and increasing the participation of women in politics. And here, of course, I'll remind you of the way in which the presentations and discussions went yesterday, that of the 8 themes that the convention has been asked to consider, this is very different from all of the other ones, in the sense that at present this isn't an issue that is in the Constitution. And all of the other themes are themes that are very specific questions relating to constitutional change that have been around for quite some while. So what we've tried to do with this ballot paper is reflect back to, in the ballot paper, the discussions we were hearing yesterday, that there could well be a role for the state that doesn't have to require constitutional reform, which is one of the questions. But then if the convention members actually feel that there is constitutional reform required, then we're allowing you the opportunity to vote on those also. So the first question, noting that Article 40 provides already, as you heard yesterday, that all citizens shall as human persons be held equal before the law, which could be interpreted as saying that gender equality is already enshrined in there. Nevertheless, as a convention, would you like to go further to say that that should be amended to explicitly provide for gender equality? And then you have the opportunity to vote yes, no, or just simply express no opinion. Then, having voted on that, you can vote on all 3 of these as we discussed previously. This is the same sort of scenario. The second one would be, should the Constitution place a duty on the state to take positive action to enhance women's participation in politics and public life? And that, as you will remember from the discussion, could be anything from enshrining gender quotas in the Constitution, quite apart from legislative action, through to a more all-encompassing gender equality clause that requires positive action by the state within the Constitution. So those are the 2 questions that reflect back the discussion yesterday that specifically relate to the possibility for constitutional reform. And quite separate from those, then, you have an opportunity to say, well, regardless of whether there's to be a constitutional reform in the matter, do we as members of the convention, do you as members of the convention, wish the government to be more proactive on this agenda than it currently is, without the need for constitutional reform? And that's that third question. So that's the first ballot paper. I'll go through the 2 ballot papers, I suppose, before the discussion. So the next ballot paper I'll start, and then I'll hand over to Jerry in a moment. This is the vote on amending the clause on the role of women in the home. So this is modelled in large part on the way we did it in the last session. So we're looking at an existing piece of legislation, a piece of constitutional something that's already in the Constitution. We're looking at the question of whether to change it, and if so, how to change it. That's what this is trying to do. So we start with the first question, which is, do we want the status quo, or do we want the principle of change? So should the clause be left exactly as it is, yes or no opinion? Then, regardless of how you individually vote on this as a convention, the next question is, okay, if this clause was to be changed, should it be just completely deleted, or should it be modified in some way or other? That's what that second question is asking you. And then the next 2 questions are then trying to tease out a bit more what the modification might be if the convention is minded to say that we do want to modify that clause. So I'm going to turn over to Jerry, who I think has the best handle on trying to describe what questions 3 and 4 are trying to elicit.
Good morning, everyone. So in relation to question 3 on the second ballot paper, I suppose the issue here really is, well, there are 2 issues. What do we understand by the concept of home, and then what do we understand by the concept of beyond the home? And if I take that first point, the question of home, if you think of this, I suppose, in terms of an onion with different layers, we can have different understandings of what home means. At the core, and given that this clause is currently located in Article 41, I would understand the term home there to mean a marital family, a family based on marriage. Okay, that's the sort of the narrowest understanding of home. Next layer of the onion would be to say, well, home should include marital families, but it should also include non-marital families, unmarried couples. Okay? Moving out again to the third layer of the onion. The first two layers of the onions are you're dealing with heterosexual couples, so the third layer of the onion would be to say, well, it should include heterosexual couples and same-sex couples, okay? And then the fourth layer of the onion would be to say, well, look, it should include all households, like siblings or, friends who are sharing accommodation, where there's no sexual relationship. So there's four layers of the onion, and I think you'll need to decide, as to where you want, which layer of the onion or which layers of the onion you want to include in that concept of home. Beyond the home, we're talking about, obviously moving outside that unit. So you would be talking there about support that neighbours might offer to each other. You would be talking about support, say, offered by home helps, people coming in, perhaps on a remunerated basis, providing support to dependent individuals. And then you could also be talking about institutional care or care in hospitals and nursing homes and the like. So that would be my understanding of beyond the home. Moving then finally to the fourth question, and this is dealing with 41.2.2. What you've been invited to consider here is what level of obligation, if any, should be imposed on the state to support mothers, in relation to domestic duties. And mothers are in square brackets there, so you might mean people other than mothers. So there are three options here. Endeavour to support would really be maintaining what's there in the Constitution at the moment, and I think we can take it that imposes very little by way of an obligation on the state to provide financial support for carers. The existing clause has been described as a duty of imperfect obligation, and I would certainly question whether you could use the existing clause in the courts to force the state to provide financial support. So you can vote to maintain that situation if you want. If you think there should be a more onerous duty imposed on the state, you could move to the next level, which is provide a reasonable level of support. And I think the thinking here is that if you vote for that, then the courts would have some role to play in reviewing what the state does for carers. But the important thing here is that the test that the courts would use here is whether or not what the state has done is reasonable, having regard to all circumstances, and in particular having regard to the state of public finances. So this would give, the state a degree, significant room for manoeuvre, that if the state could come back and say, well, we'd love to do more for carers, but unfortunately, the monies that we have are such, this is all we can do, the courts might accept that as reasonable provision under the circumstances, and that would comply. That would mean the state was complying with that level of support. Shall support, I think, is intended to reflect a more onerous duty on the state again. And here the idea is that at this level, the Constitution would stipulate in a little bit more detail precisely what has to be done for carers. The term that we academics use here would be to talk about minimum content of guarantee. In other words, that the Constitution would somehow stipulate this is the minimum level you've got to get to. The state has absolutely got to get to this minimum level, no matter what. And in that sort of situation, it's more rigorous. It wouldn't be enough for the state to come back and say, well, we've fallen short, but we've done what's reasonable. They would still be held to account and told, no, you must actually get to this minimum standard, whatever the minimum standard would be. Okay, so those are the three options.
Okay, thank you both very much. Now, let's we'll open the floor for discussion, and we'll discuss in the order that they were presented. So the first ballot paper that David went through, the suggested three questions on encouraging greater participation of women in public life and increasing the public life and politics, actually, politics and public life in both cases, increasing the participation of women. Any comments on these? Yeah. Do you think it's our attempt to suggest the discussion that was held yesterday, do you feel that it's a relatively accurate attempt to do that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've one comment here. Thanks, Susan. Susan, yeah, I did say before you came into the room that I'm going to operate on the principle that people who didn't speak yesterday will have first choice. But if there's nobody else offering, Susan, could you go ahead? Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Chair. I just first of all, thank you for drawing these up. It was actually just to ask for clarification on the first one, noting that Article 40 provides and so on. Does that mean that we would be amending Article 40 specifically, or is it the Constitution in another place? So, noting that Article 40 provides that all citizens shall as human persons be held equal before the law, should the Constitution be amended? Does that mean should the Constitution, i.e. Article 40, or the Constitution in general?
Well, I'll leave that to the expert, but I would have thought that we're not suggesting that we amend Article 40. Article 40 is there as a given. It's an important recognition of the equality principle, and this is suggesting that some additional provision in addition to Article 40 be added. Now, am I right in that?
That would be the understanding. That whatever if the convention voted in favour of this, it would then be going back to government as a recommendation from the convention. The government would then have to come up with the proposals that would eventually go to the people in a referendum question.
Could I just be clear as well that what we have here before you are draft voting papers. They are not the voting papers until we as a convention approve them. So the purpose of this session is to seek your approval or finalisation of the voting paper. So Susan, I think that your question, I take it, is answered. Okay, fine. Joan.
Joan Stewart, I'd just like to ask, we had discussed, and I think other tables had as well, about having a gender neutral language throughout the Constitution, changing all the he's to he stroke she or whatever, and you know, the misters and that isn't reflected in these ballot papers.
Yeah. Again, could I just make the general point that not everything that you discussed yesterday is going to be reflected in the ballot paper. What we have attempted to do here is pick out what we regarded as the most important issues under both headings, so that we have a manageable number of issues on which to vote. But it is also clear that in the report, a whole lot of issues that were discussed and that were noted and which we will not be voting on will be reported upon in the final report of the convention. That's a general point. I'm not avoiding your question. Okay, this table here first.
Jerry Farrell. I'm just slightly confused. When we fill in both of these documents, that's information that we're feeding back. Will we be seeing some sort of a draft proposal in terms of the wording, or is that something that's going to come at a later stage that we get a chance to vote on?
Later. Well, firstly, you know, we are not in the business of drafting detailed suggestions which might end up in the form of a referendum. We're trying to establish broad policy directions or broad preferences, and we will be reflecting those, you know, in the vote or in the report. If it got to the point that the government is framing a referendum, it will be up to government lawyers to come up with precise wording to reflect what the, if you like, the wishes of the convention.
Sure, I fully understand that.
Okay.
But surely this group, would it not be valid for this group to be coming up with some set of words that we all agree on this room that we would like to see? Sure, obviously it's not down to the convention what the government accept from here or what goes to referendum. But surely we all have views, and we can see that the Women's Council of Ireland, they have suggested wording. Surely this forum should be suggesting a certain sets of words that we would like to see in change in the Constitution. That's not to say that they're going to be accepted. But my problem is we walk away from here today and then somebody else comes up with a set of wordings. When do we get a chance as a forum to agree that that's exactly what we agreed here?
Again, I have to go back to the point that with the time available overnight, we had to try to identify what we thought were the most important issues which reflected the discussion yesterday. I can assure you, even getting to these set of questions was fairly challenging, and if we were to get to an extra level of detail of coming up with explicit wording, I don't think it would be possible in the time available. Yeah.
Hi, Alan Green. At this table yesterday, at table 3, we had some discussion about adding a provision for gender equality, and we had some concerns that the second paragraph of Article 40.1 might also require changes in other articles, specifically 41.2, as it states that the state shall have due regard to differences of capacity, physical and moral, and of social function, and that could possibly be read that from Article 41.2, the social function of the mother or of the wife in the home. So that might slightly weaken any specific provision of gender equality. Any comments on that?
Jerry, could I ask you to comment on that?
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be here yesterday afternoon for the discussion. I suppose the first thing I'd say is that gender equality is probably caught up in the concept, or in the formula, all citizens shall as human persons be held equal before the law. But unfortunately, and you might expect a lawyer to say this, it's not as simple as simply saying that this covers gender equality. There are other issues you have to then start addressing, such as, say for example, in the United States, they operate on the basis of a presumption against certain forms of discrimination, which then places the onus on the state. If they're going to discriminate on grounds of, say, for example, race, there's a heavy onus on the state to justify it. You could make the same argument in the Irish context. You know, should the Constitution be obliging the state to justify instances of gender discrimination? But the Constitution is, at best I can say, the Constitution is unclear on that. So it's not simply, you know, if you want to have a proper discussion on the impact of Article 40, Section 1, you need to spend a little bit more time going into, you know, how that clause has been interpreted by the courts. I mean, what I would say generally is I don't think the courts have interpreted that clause in a particularly good way. It's a rather they've taken a very conservative approach to that particular guarantee. Now, that's probably not very helpful, Chair, but you know, in the context of a short answer, I'm not sure I can go much beyond that.
Okay, thank you. Not sure we can take that any further. I mean, it's an important point, but yeah. This table, Mary.
Chairman, thank you, Chairman. Given that we're speaking this morning about participation of women in public life and increasing the participation of women in politics, can I ask why there is no woman at the top table this morning?
Well, I mean, I'm sorry, but you know, you have at the top table the chair, head of the secretariat, and you have two experts. Yesterday we had a majority of our experts were women. So, I mean, that's the answer. I'm sorry. Well, these are the most appropriate people for what we've been asked to do at the moment. And if we want, and I very much appreciate the contributions of all the experts yesterday, and certainly we will be calling on them in the course of the morning. Is there another comment? Yeah, Katrina.
I'd just like to support what Table 5 were saying about language. I think if someone picks up our Constitution and they see he, the first point of reading it, you're excluding women. And I think we should deal with that question seriously, and I would like to see something on the ballot paper that makes sure the language in our Constitution is equal for all.
Yeah. Let's see at the end of the discussion whether we want to maybe add an extra question on that or something. Okay. Are there Any other comments? We're still, I mean, just to confirm, we're still dealing with this issue, the draft ballot paper on the greater participation of women in public life and politics. Yeah.
My name is Peter Halligan.
Could you stand up, please?
Yeah, my name is Peter Halligan. Yeah, we were looking at gender equality, and I brought up a point. I don't know if people agreed with it or not. There didn't seem to be any dissent. Was that mentioning gender equality specifically in the Constitution kind of shows an indication of moving away from our patriarchal roots. We started off with a very, it was male-dominated society, and we're moving away from that. Maybe that's just a signal and an indication of where we want to move in the future. And like that, it's gender equality, John. That's what it is, specifically in gender neutrality. And I think with that comes I just wanted to echo what other people were saying, like that the language in it is very male, and if we're talking about gender equality, let's move away from just that male-orientated language anyway. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Francis.
Thanks, Francis Fitzgerald. I support the point that's been made in relation to language in the Constitution, because I think if you're talking about gender equality, it goes right through the Constitution. And I would like personally to see a question in relation to that and get the views of the Convention on it. In relation to the first question here, I'd like a bit more information, David, from you and Jerry, in relation to how gender equality has been interpreted under that article to date, and how gender equality has been protected under it, because I don't think we discussed that very much yesterday, and I think people need to have some feel about that, because when you say noting that Article 40 provides that all citizens shall, etc., there's kind of, well, as if it's there. So I just want to know, what is the precedent, and how much has gender equality been developed or protected under the Constitution as it stands at the moment in relation to that article? Thank you.
Yeah, well, there have been some instances where the courts have struck down examples of gender discrimination. So, for example, and I mentioned two of them yesterday, the exclusion of women from jury service was declared unconstitutional in De Burke and Attorney General. And then on the other side, if you want to put it like that, the restrictions imposed on widowers being allowed to adopt, that was similarly declared to be unconstitutional in OG and the Attorney General. So there have been situations where gender discrimination has been struck down. But equally, there have been some, certainly there was a relatively recent case where gender discrimination was upheld. And this was in the context of relatively recent legislation criminalising underage sex. The legislation differentiates between teenage boys and teenage girls in that if a teenage boy and a teenage girl have full sexual intercourse, the boy is committing an offence, but the girl is not. So that is gender discrimination, and the Supreme Court upheld that decision. Now, just if I can just add, I would have a concern about that decision in this sense. If you were to follow the US precedent, you could come along and approach issues like equality and say, look, there are certain grounds that we really don't like gender discrimination, race discrimination, or whatever. And that if the state decides it wants to have legislation which reflects gender discrimination, there should be a heavy onus on the state to justify that. The state, must have to make a compelling case to justify the gender discrimination. The Supreme Court didn't take that approach, as I read it anyway, in that case dealing with gender discrimination. So that's kind of why I'm a bit, little bit unhappy with the current situation. But they're the best instances I can think of where gender discrimination has been tackled by the courts.
Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Yvonne Carney, Table 3. There was a sentence came up yesterday on the screen, and it's been niggling at me all evening. It said women are a diverse group. I found the word diverse offensive because it implied that we weren't able to be organised or able to. Do you know that we were all over the place? Mm-hmm. And I'd like to know where it came from. Was it something official, or was it somebody in the room said it?
To be honest, I don't recall, Yvonne,
Yeah,
the
it
precise
was.
context anyway, I mean, whatever about that statement, what it means or not, I doubt if it bears much on, what we're here to discuss this morning, I think.
Yeah, there was just three things on the screen.
I understand if you... Yeah, well, I certainly don't... I wouldn't attach any significance to it. I can't remember what it was on the screen.
Well, I didn't think it was a word suitable to be used. For us.
Okay.
Or anything but. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. I've heard the point about the language in the Constitution has come from a number of different tables. We'd be perfectly happy to try to draft something which would reflect the wishes and come back to you with a suggested question for voting on. Yeah, Tom.
Thanks, Chairman. Tom Burke. Just on the language in the Constitution, I don't think we need to amend the ballot paper. Provided in the draft report, which we'll all have an opportunity to comment on, that it's worded on the Convention felt that that type of language will be sufficient for me.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Look, let's bring this to a conclusion because we are really going to be tight for time. We have two possibilities here in regard to the language. One is to do exactly what Tom says, that we noted in the report. The second issue is to vote on it as a convention. So could we vote on which of these options we want? Who wants to have a vote on it first? Could I... Yeah, I mean, I don't actually know. We better find somebody to count this because could somebody count at the back, please? Who? Well, okay, let's have a look at those against because we might.
Tom, I have some wording.
Okay, well, there's the majority in favour of so a draft. We've been working while as we speak on a possible question. Should the text of the Constitution be amended to make it gender neutral? Should the text of the Constitution be amended to make it gender neutral? We will put that to you as an additional question. Okay. Now, I am going to comment from the back, Jane. Sorry. There's two. Oh, sorry. The second. I didn't see this. Sorry. The second possible question to vote on is: should the text of the Constitution be amended to use gender-inclusive language? Now, could somebody explain the difference between these? Whoever the draft wordsmiths there at the back, could we have an explanation of what the practical difference is here?
Well, if I may, the practical difference in this regard is that gender-neutral language can often hide a male bias within it. Gender-inclusive language more explicitly recognises women and men, whereas gender-neutral language, if it's phrased as, for example, it is said, or whatever the phraseology is, can carry within it a gendered bias in favour of the male. Whereas gender-inclusive language requires explicitly male-female recognition.
Okay. I mean, I know we really are now, I can assure you, this is an example now of, the difficulty of trying to get into detailed drafting. Because it really does, it gets complicated and time-consuming. But just to try to cut to the chase, and this is very crude, and I'm not having any further comments on this because we don't have the time. The first option is, should the text be amended to make it gender neutral? The second option is, should the text be amended to use gender-inclusive language? The first option, should the text be amended to make it gender neutral? A show of hands. In favour of that question. Second question, second option, should the text of the Constitution be amended to use gender-inclusive language? Okay, majority. That's the question we will be asking you. Okay, we have to, can I take it, I'm sorry, can I take it that you are willing then, with the addition of this extra question, to approve these other 3 questions on this issue to vote on? Okay, fine. Could we move to the second question, the second issue, which is amending the clause on the vote of women in the home? And again, David and just recalling the explanation that David and Jerry have given in regard to these draft potential 4 questions. Could I have any comments that people have on these? Rona.
Well, can I first of all thank our experts for doing a very difficult job very well. Just one question. It relates to question 3, and the first possibility there, making it in the event that the convention supports change, what change or changes would you support? The option there to make it gender neutral to include other carers in the home. Now, I realise there are a range of different possibilities, but I take it that it's intended in that to leave for another day the precise categories within carers that one would include. As Jerry rightly pointed out, there are many layers to the onion. One might talk about parents and guardians. One might go beyond heterosexual parenting. One might move to non-related carers or husband and wife, etc. So I think I'm correct, but I'd just like to clarify that this leaves for another day the precise definition of what constitutes a carer for the purpose of any such reference.
Well, certainly we felt that there are certain categories of carers or certain categories where we will certainly be leaving to another day. Absolutely. Specifically, our next meeting is on same-sex marriage, and we reckon that the issues there are sufficiently complex that we should take the time to deal with them in that meeting rather than in this meeting. Jerry, would you like to add?
No, I mean, I suppose what I was invited to do this morning was just to offer an explanation as to how the word home might be understood in that question as it stood. So I was simply laying out what I saw as the sort of the logical options for understanding that term. But as to how the convention wants to approach it, whether it wants to deal with that question now or defer it for a later stage, I wouldn't have any view on that. That's a matter for the convention.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Francis.
Thank you. Yes, I'm assuming the same, that in 3, making it gender neutral, we're not actually discussing family form. Jerry, you did address various family forms, but we're not actually voting on that. We're just voting on the gender neutral aspect. And in relation to number 4, is that assuming that Article 41.2.2 might not be deleted? I mean, it could be deleted. And I'm just wondering if, where we say endeavour to ensure that mothers, and I see that that's in brackets, is the question then essentially, if, for example, we said it should be changed to include carers beyond the home, carers in the community, is the vote then effectively on saying that carers in the community should, the government should endeavour to support, provide a reasonable level of support, or shall support carers in the community? Do you see the point I'm making? It applies across all the categories, that question, does it? Just to be clear on that. It does?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
David, do you want to comment on this?
I mean, insofar as when we were phrasing the question 4, Francis, I mean, whatever happens, regardless of whatever happens specifically to Article 41.2.2, that's almost separate from this question, but we wanted to set the context in the question itself. We're just asking you to consider in the round what level of support you think the state should be obliged to provide.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah, Stephen. Or sorry, PJ.
On question 1 and question 2, well, question 1 asks you, do you want to leave it as it is? So if you say no to that, then you have question 2 to consider. But question 2, 41.2 contains two subsections. But if you altered 41.2.1, you could then maybe delete 41.2.2.
Can I answer?
So I think it maybe could be split.
This sort of topic came up, this kind of question came up the last time we were trying to frame the ballot paper design. And the best way to try and summarise it is to say that you as an individual member of the convention, you can vote as you like all the way through this, but we need to trap the views of the total membership. So whatever way you vote on each individual vote, in the event that the Constitutional Convention takes a decision to do this, where would you be on that particular question? So if the convention, as a body, are in favour of modifying that article, where would you be in terms of the questions of modification, regardless of whether you yourself voted for modification or not? So this is designed to make sure that everyone in the room, all the members, are allowed to vote on every single item before them.
Yeah, it was really attempting to learn from, if you like, the equivalent session on the first day. Yeah. Stephen.
Stephen Agnew, and I think if I could just clarify PJ's point, because I'm not sure if it's being picked up correctly. There was certainly, it wasn't my own personal view, but there was certainly a view around the table that 42.2, make sure I get it right, should actually just be deleted. So, you know, that 42.1 was sufficient if properly amended. So I think certainly from gathering the views at my table, I think that's probably something that people would like to see as an option. I hadn't sort of put my hand up to make that point. Another point I'd like to make, I mean, hats off in terms of trying to, with this particular ballot, try to capture the views in the room. But I think it is probably impossible if you look at the issues of what does home mean, what does family mean. I do wonder, while it's maybe not what would normally be in a ballot, but a space almost for any other points, just so that we don't, because even with the facilitators, it's a very difficult job reflecting the diverse nuances, just to make sure that we all get that opportunity to make sure these extra points are included in the report, because it was there were so many different nuances to the argument. I certainly think I'd probably walk away going, did I make that point strongly enough? Was it picked up? Will it be in the report? And this gives us an opportunity to just say, look, you can't put everything in a yes/no tick box question, but maybe there are just some points that if they come up frequently throughout the tables and any other comments, then it would make sense to include them in the report.
But I mean, they will be included in the reports, Stephen. I mean, that's the whole purpose of having a report to go, sure, in addition to a result of a ballot, is to reflect that greater diversity that, you know, it's not actually even appropriate at times to try to vote on certain things. Our task really here this morning is to try and pin down what we are really the most important issues, and I think you'll have to leave it with us to capture the wider richness of the discussion. And, you know, before anything is signed off in any report, that draft report will be circulated to people, and hopefully and if there's comments, if there's something left out, people can have the right to point that out. Owen, did I see a hand at the back? No. Okay.
Thank you. Hi, good morning. Regina Doherty is my name. Can I just agree?
Regina, could you stand up?
Apologies, sorry. Can I agree with what David has said? And it's not to be awkward, and I know I was probably alone or lonely in my views yesterday, but for argument's sake, in option 3, you're giving the option to modify it, but both of the options to modify it, in my view, are to actually dilute it. So it doesn't give me the option to say, I feel it should be strengthened. I feel that this article is about women, it's about mothers, and it's about their special relationship and contribution to Irish society and in the home. But that's not reflected in the options that I have to vote for this morning. But if I had a box, I might be able to express that view without having to ask you to change the whole ballot paper to put maybe a singular view like mine towards the overall ballot. Thank you.
Well, I mean, the only thing that I would add to what Tom just said is there is a survey that we're going to be inviting you to respond to, and at the end of the survey there is a box where we specifically ask you to add in any comments that you felt needed to be added, including comments about other issues that you would like the convention to be discussing. And all I could do is just encourage you to put that in there, because we are looking at those.
I mean, we are now, we've certainly gone over our time allocated for this issue, and I'm not surprised, because it's probably the most important thing we do this morning, is to try to get as good as we can the questions that you want to vote on. So I'm not complaining that we've gone over time. It does mean we're eating into the time from the other interest groups that we're going to hear from a little bit later on. But I'd be very keen that we get to the point of hopefully agreeing this ballot paper. Susan. Sorry, microphone over here.
Hello, my name is Susan Brady. I just have one concern, maybe I'm alone in this concern, is the issue of the word mother in the Irish Constitution. And the only place that mother is mentioned in the Irish Constitution is under Article 41. And I personally believe, maybe it's me alone, that the word mother should be included. Not in the way it's actually phrased in that, but I think the word mother, I mean, that is very significant, mother. Carer and a mother is two different things, in my opinion. I know a mother can be a carer. However, a mother is fundamental and very, very important. I would like the retention of that word, mother, whether it's here or whether it's somewhere else. But I just think the word mother is very, very important.
Well, you're certainly not alone. I mean, that view was actually expressed forcefully yesterday. It was, yeah. There were a couple of people made that comment, the importance, the symbolic and other importance of having the word mother in the Constitution. So, I mean, we certainly can reflect that in our report. Are there any other comments? If not, could I ask for your approval for these set of questions? Agreed. Thank you. Okay.